The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that felt rehearsed, like silence was trying to hide something it couldn't quite keep buried. The air in their Pasadena home carried the weight of words never spoken, questions never asked, and truths deliberately avoided. Outside, Los Angeles glowed with its usual electric promise, but inside their glass-walled sanctuary, darkness had settled in ways that had nothing to do with light. Hannah stood in the doorway of the living room, watching her husband sit on the couch with his attention fixed on nothing. The man she married used to fill rooms with warmth. His laughter used to echo off these same walls. His presence used to make coming home feel like arriving somewhere that mattered. Now he felt like a guest who'd overstayed out of obligation, polite, distant, carefully contained. She couldn't remember exactly when it changed. Maybe it was gradual, like erosion. Maybe it happened all at once and she simply refused to notice. But somewhere between their 10th anniversary dinner at Spargo Beverly Hills and this moment, Daniel Moon had stopped being her husband and become a stranger who shared her address. He still paid the bills, still came home most nights, still maintained the machinery of their marriage with mechanical precision. But the man who used to reach for her hand while watching movies, who used to kiss her forehead before leaving for work, who used to look at her like she was the answer to questions he hadn't even asked yet, that man had vanished. In his place sat someone who looked at her the way you look at furniture you're planning to replace but haven't gotten around to moving yet. "Why don't you want me anymore?" she asked. Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the fear she'd been carrying for months. The question hung in the air between them like smoke, visible and suffocating. Daniel didn't answer right away. For months, he had practiced this moment in his head, imagined shouting, imagined walking out, imagined losing control in ways that would feel satisfying and justified. But when it finally arrived, all he felt was exhaustion. The kind that lives in your bones and makes even breathing feel like labor. "What makes you think that?" he asked quietly, still not looking at her. "Because you don't touch me," Hannah said, her arms wrapping tighter around herself, as if she could physically hold together the pieces that were already falling apart. "Because you sleep in the guest room. Because you look at me like I'm already gone." Daniel stood slowly, as if standing required permission from his bones. His movements were careful, measured, empty of the passion that used to define everything he did. He was a tall man with dark hair that had started going silver at the temples, the kind of handsome that matured well. But tonight, in the dim light of their living room, he looked older than his 42 years. Older and impossibly tired. "You really want the truth?" he asked. She nodded, her honey blonde hair catching the light from the city below. She thought she was ready. She thought the danger was in his anger, in the possibility that he might shout or accuse or unleash the rage she'd been bracing for. She was wrong. The danger was in how calm he was, because calm meant certainty. And certainty meant he had already decided what she didn't yet understand. Calm meant he'd moved past the part where her actions could still be explained away or forgiven. Calm meant the ending had already been written, and she was just now arriving to read the final page. Some questions change everything. Some answers end things forever. And some betrayals don't need shouting to be devastating. They only need silence and proof. Daniel walked to his desk with the deliberate pace of a man who had run this scene through his mind 1,000 times. He pulled out a slim manila folder, the kind you buy at any Staples or Office Depot for a few dollars, and placed it on the glass coffee table between them with a soft thud that sounded louder than it should have. Hannah stared at it like it was a live grenade. "What is that?" she whispered. "Everything you thought I didn't know," Daniel said. 3 months earlier, their life had looked perfect from the outside. Daniel and Hannah Moon lived in a modern 3-bedroom home in Pasadena, with panoramic views of the San Gabriel Mountains. They drove good cars, his Tesla, her Lexus. They took vacations to Napa Valley and Seattle. They had successful careers, no debt, and the kind of comfortable upper-middle-class existence that made their parents proud. Daniel worked as a senior software architect for a firm in Century City, commuting down the 110 most mornings to an office tower that overlooked the Pacific. Hannah managed digital marketing for a boutique agency in Burbank, coordinating campaigns for lifestyle brands that sold expensive minimalism to people who could afford to pay for simplicity. They'd met in Chicago 12 years ago at a tech conference where Daniel was speaking about cloud infrastructure and Hannah was managing vendor relations. She'd been 28 then, bright and ambitious, with a smile that made him forget his presentation notes. He'd been 30, earnest and steady, the kind of man who still believed hard work and honesty were enough to build a life on. They married within a year, moved to Los Angeles within 2. For the first 8 years, it worked. They worked. They grew together in the way couples are supposed to, learning each other's patterns, building traditions, creating a shared language of inside jokes and comfortable silences that felt like home. But somewhere around year 9, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no fight, no inciting incident, no moment Daniel could point to and say, "That's when it broke." It was more like watching a plant die from lack of water. Slow, barely noticeable at first, then suddenly obvious once the damage was already done. Hannah started working later. She stopped asking about his day. She began guarding her phone with a vigilance that felt out of proportion to normal privacy. She'd take calls in the other room, angling her screen away when he walked past, clearing notifications with the kind of casual urgency that only comes from practice. At first, Daniel told himself it was work stress. Agency life could be demanding, especially when managing multiple clients across time zones. It made sense that she'd be on her phone more. It made sense that she'd be tired, distracted, mentally elsewhere. Except it didn't explain why she'd started dressing differently, or why she'd rejoined the gym after years of insisting she was too busy, or why her laughter had returned. That bright, genuine laugh he'd fallen in love with in Chicago. But never when she was with him. He'd hear it sometimes through the bedroom door when she was on the phone. Light and unguarded, the way she used to sound when they first dated. But the moment she'd see him, the laugh would die, replaced by something polite and distant. Daniel wasn't a suspicious man by nature. He believed in trust, in giving people the benefit of the doubt, in not letting paranoia poison what should be sacred. So for weeks, he ignored the small inconsistencies, the late nights that became later, the weekend team-building events that cropped up with increasing frequency. The way she'd started showering as soon as she got home, even when she'd showered that morning. He ignored it because acknowledging it meant facing something he wasn't ready to face. But denial only works until it doesn't. The breaking point came on a Thursday in June. Daniel had left work early to surprise Hannah with dinner reservations at Republique, the French restaurant she'd been wanting to try for months. He'd called ahead, secured a table, picked up flowers from the farmer's market on Larchmont. He drove home feeling optimistic for the first time in weeks, convinced that maybe they just needed one good night to remember why they'd chosen each other in the first place. He walked into their house at 6:30. The lights were off. Hannah's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't in the kitchen or the living room. He called her name. No answer. He checked the home office, the guest room, the backyard. Nothing. Then he heard it. Laughter. Her laughter. Coming from their bedroom. Not just laughter. Conversation. Low and intimate. The kind of tone you don't use with co-workers or clients. Daniel stood in the hallway, flowers in hand, listening to his wife talk to someone who clearly wasn't him. "I know," she was saying. "I know. I need a little more time." A pause. "He doesn't suspect anything. We're fine. You don't need to worry." Another pause, longer this time. "I miss you too." Daniel set the flowers on the hallway table and walked back to his car. He didn't slam the door, didn't announce himself, didn't confront her. He just left, drove to Griffith Park, and sat on a bench overlooking the city until the sun went down and the lights came on like a million tiny lies glittering in the dark. That was the moment he knew. Not suspected, not feared, knew. And once you know, you can't unknow. You can only decide what to do with the knowledge. Hannah had been lying to herself long before she started lying to Daniel. It started small, the way most betrayals do, with rationalizations that felt reasonable at the time. She told herself she deserved attention, told herself that marriage wasn't supposed to feel this routine, this predictable, this devoid of excitement, told herself that wanting more didn't make her a bad person. She'd met Marcus at a client event in Santa Monica. He was a creative director for one of the brands her agency represented. The kind of man who wore expensive casual clothes and spoke in practiced charm, tall, fit, confident in ways that felt effortless. He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years, like she was interesting, desirable, worth pursuing. At first, it was just conversation. Then it was lunch meetings that ran long. Then it was texts that started professional and drifted personal. Then it was drinks after work. Then it was the first kiss in the parking structure at the Grove, pressed against her Lexus with the taste of whiskey and guilt on her lips. Then it was the hotel room in West Hollywood where she told herself it was just once, just this one time, just to see if what she felt was real. But once became twice. Twice became a pattern. And patterns became the architecture of a second life she'd built in the shadows of the first. Hannah knew it was wrong. She wasn't delusional enough to pretend otherwise, but she'd become skilled at compartmentalization, at separating the version of herself who loved Daniel from the version who met Marcus at the Standard, or the Ace Hotel, or whatever anonymous space could hold her choices for a few stolen hours. She told herself Daniel was too consumed with work to notice. She told herself their marriage had been dying anyway, that this was just accelerating the inevitable. She told herself she'd end it soon, that she just needed a little more time to figure out what she really wanted. But the truth she couldn't quite admit, was that she didn't want to choose. She wanted both. The stability and safety of Daniel, the excitement and validation of Marcus. She wanted her comfortable life in Pasadena and her reckless escapes to hotels where nobody knew her name. She wanted to keep the husband who paid the mortgage and the lover who made her feel alive. And for 3 months, she convinced herself it was possible. Until the night Daniel stopped sleeping in their bedroom. It happened without announcement, without explanation. She came home from another late meeting, this one actually a meeting, ironically, and found his side of the bed empty. His pillow gone, his phone charger unplugged. She found him in the guest room, already asleep or pretending to be. "Daniel?" she called softly from the doorway. He didn't respond. She stood there for a long moment, fear creeping up her spine like cold fingers. But instead of pushing, instead of demanding answers, she retreated. Because part of her already knew, and knowing meant facing consequences she wasn't ready to face. The next morning she tried to act normal. Made coffee, asked about his schedule, mentioned a new Thai place that opened in Old Town Pasadena. Daniel answered in monosyllables, polite and distant. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "You sure? You seem off." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment she thought he might say something real. But instead, he just smiled, a thin, brittle thing that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine, Hannah. Just tired." She wanted to believe him. So she did. Because believing him was easier than believing the alternative. That he knew. That he'd known for longer than she realized. And that the silence stretching between them wasn't ignorance, but strategy. The weeks that followed established a new normal. Daniel was never cruel, never loud, never accusatory. He simply withdrew. He stopped initiating conversation, stopped asking about her day, stopped reaching for her in the small, unconscious ways he used to. The hand on her back when passing in the kitchen, the kiss goodbye before leaving for work, the casual intimacy that marriage is supposed to create. He became cordial, professional, a roommate with a shared last name. Hannah told herself it was temporary, told herself they were just in a rough patch, that all marriages went through this, that they'd find their way back eventually. She doubled down on the affair, seeing Marcus more frequently, as if the intensity of his attention could compensate for Daniel's withdrawal. But even as she lost herself in Marcus's arms, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. She'd catch Daniel watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't read, not angry, not hurt, just observing, like she was a stranger he was trying to figure out. It terrified her more than rage would have, because rage meant he still cared enough to feel something. This calm, analytical distance meant he'd moved beyond caring into something colder and more final. She wanted to ask him about it, wanted to force a conversation, demand honesty, clear the air. But every time she came close, fear stopped her. Because asking meant answering, and answering meant admitting what she'd done. So instead, she avoided. She stayed late at work. She made plans with friends. She filled her calendar with distractions that kept her away from the house and the man whose silence had become unbearable. And when she absolutely had to be home, she retreated to her phone, to Marcus's texts, to social media, to anything that could create a buffer between her and the reckoning she knew was coming. Until finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Until finally, standing in the doorway of their living room, watching Daniel sit alone in the dark, the question escaped before she could stop it. "Why don't you want me anymore?" And the world she'd been carefully constructing came crashing down. Daniel had discovered the truth on a Tuesday. Not dramatically, not through some elaborate detective work or hired investigator. Just an unlocked phone and a notification that appeared at the wrong moment. He hadn't been snooping. Hannah had been in the shower and her phone was on the kitchen counter charging. A text came through, the preview visible on the lock screen before it faded. "Marcus, last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you Friday." Daniel stood there, coffee mug in hand, staring at words that rewrote his entire marriage in 8 seconds. He could have confronted her immediately, could have raged, demanded explanations, forced the conversation right then. But something in him went quiet instead, calculating. He needed to know the scope before he acted. So he waited until Hannah left for work, then picked up her laptop. The one she sometimes forgot to lock because she trusted him, because they were married, because betrayal was supposed to go both ways. Or not at all. Her email was open. Her messages synced. And Daniel, sitting at their kitchen table in Pasadena with morning light streaming through the windows, read every message, every exchange, every plan they'd made and memory they'd created while he'd been working 60-hour weeks to pay for the life she was using to betray him. The affair had been going on for 3 months. Marcus Rivera, creative director, 38, divorced, No kids. An apartment in Silver Lake with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that Hannah had described in detail in one of her messages. They'd met at hotels mostly. The Standard in West Hollywood, the Line in Koreatown, occasionally his place when Daniel was traveling for work. They'd been careful, but not careful enough. There were photos, not explicit, but intimate. Hannah, laughing in ways Daniel hadn't seen in years. Marcus's arm around her shoulder at some rooftop bar in downtown LA. A selfie from a weekend in Palm Springs that Hannah had told Daniel was a girl's trip. The messages were worse than the photos. Not because they were sexual, though some were, but because they showed a version of Hannah he didn't recognize. Playful, adventurous, emotionally available. All the things she used to be with him, but had stopped being somewhere along the way. Hannah, I know this is wrong, but I can't remember the last time I felt this alive. Marcus, you deserve to feel like this all the time. He doesn't appreciate what he has. Hannah, it's complicated. He's a good man. Marcus, good men don't let their wives feel invisible. Daniel read that exchange 3 times, each reading carving out a deeper hollow in his chest. Because Marcus was right and wrong at the same time. Daniel had let the marriage drift, had gotten complacent, had stopped making Hannah feel prioritized, but he'd also been working 12-hour days to afford the house, the cars, the lifestyle she wanted. He'd been faithful, present, committed in every way he knew how, and apparently it hadn't been enough. He could have ended it that day, could have packed her bags, changed the locks, filed for divorce before she even knew he'd found out. But Daniel Moon was methodical by nature, and rage made you sloppy. So instead, he did what he always did when faced with a complex problem. He gathered information, analyzed patterns, and formulated a plan. He hired a lawyer, not for divorce yet, but for consultation, to understand his options, his rights. What a separation would look like financially and legally in California's community property landscape. He documented everything, screenshots of messages, emails, photos. He created a cloud folder that Hannah didn't have access to and backed up evidence that would make denial impossible. He opened a separate bank account and began quietly moving money. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to have resources if things got ugly. And then he watched. He watched Hannah come home from her late meetings, with makeup refreshed and energy renewed. He watched her text Marcus from their dining room table while Daniel sat 5 feet away. He watched her lie with practiced ease, her face showing nothing but casual affection when she kissed Daniel's cheek before bed. He watched, and with each observation, something in him calcified. Not into hatred. Daniel wasn't capable of hating Hannah even now, but into something colder. A fundamental reordering of how he understood their relationship and what it meant. For 10 years, he'd believed marriage was sacred, that vows meant something, that the woman he'd chosen had chosen him with equal commitment. But watching Hannah move through their home with secrets in her pocket and lies on her lips taught him something brutal. Love isn't enough when respect is gone. She didn't respect him enough to be honest, didn't respect their marriage enough to end it before starting something new, didn't respect herself enough to make a clean choice instead of living in deception, and Daniel couldn't build a future on that foundation. So he stopped sleeping in their bedroom, stopped initiating intimacy, stopped performing the emotional labor that had been keeping their marriage animated long after it had died. He didn't do it to punish her. He did it because pretending felt more dishonest than her betrayal. Hannah noticed, of course. How could she not? But instead of asking directly, she danced around it. Tentative questions, nervous glances, the body language of someone who suspected but didn't want confirmation. Daniel let her wonder. Let her feel the discomfort of uncertainty the way he'd felt it for months. And when she finally worked up the courage to ask why he didn't want her anymore, he was ready. Not with rage, not with theatrics, just with the truth, printed and organized in a manila folder that held the death certificate of everything they'd built together. The folder sat on the coffee table like evidence at a trial. Hannah stared at it, her breath coming faster, hands trembling at her sides. The city lights of Los Angeles glittered through the glass walls of their living room, indifferent and beautiful, continuing their nightly performance while her world prepared to collapse. "What is that?" she asked again, though part of her already knew. Daniel didn't sit back down. He stood near the windows, arms crossed, face cast in shadow and light. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but precise. The voice of a man who'd rehearsed this moment until emotion had been engineered out of it. "It's everything, Hannah. Every message, every photo, every lie you've told me for the last 3 months." The air left her lungs. "Daniel, don't." The word was soft but absolute. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about." Hannah's legs felt unsteady. She moved to the couch and sat, not because she wanted to, but because standing required strength she didn't have. Her hands gripped the fabric of her robe, the cream-colored silk one Daniel had bought her for their anniversary 2 years ago. "When?" she whispered. "When did I find out?" Daniel turned to face her fully, and in the dim light, she could see the exhaustion etched into his features. "June 17th, a Tuesday. You were in the shower. Marcus texted you about how perfect the night before was. 3 months. He'd known for 3 months. Why didn't you say anything?" Hannah's voice broke on the question. "Because I needed to be sure. Because I needed proof. Because—" Daniel stopped, jaw tightening. "Because I wanted to believe there was some explanation, that maybe I was wrong, that maybe the woman I married for 10 years wouldn't do this." Tears started rolling down Hannah's face, hot and immediate. "Daniel, please. Open it." "What?" "The folder. Open it." Hannah looked down at the manila folder like it was radioactive. Her hands shook as she reached for it, pulling it onto her lap with the heaviness of something that weighed far more than paper should. Inside were printouts, screenshots of text messages between her and Marcus, organized chronologically, photos of them together, laughing at the rooftop bar in DTLA, holding hands in Palm Springs, a selfie in bed that made her stomach turn because she remembered taking it, remembered feeling desirable and reckless and alive. There were bank statements showing hotel charges, calendar exports showing when she'd claimed to be working late versus when Marcus's messages suggested otherwise. Email exchanges where they'd planned their secret meetings with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this enough times to be good at it. Evidence, undeniable and comprehensive. Hannah's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the pages. "I can explain," she started. "No," Daniel said. "You can't. That's the thing about evidence, Hannah. It doesn't need explanation. It just is." She looked up at him, mascara running, face blotchy and desperate. "It didn't mean anything," she said. "It was just, I was confused. I was lonely. I made a mistake." "For 3 months?" Daniel's voice remained calm, which somehow made it worse. "You made a mistake for 3 months? That's not a mistake, Hannah. That's a choice. Multiple choices. Every day you woke up and decided to continue lying to me. I was going to end it." The words came out too loud, too desperate. "I swear I was planning to end it with him. I just needed time to— To what? Figure out if he was a better option? See if you could have both of us." Silence crashed between them. "Because he was right. That's exactly what she'd been doing. "I love you," Hannah said. And she meant it. That was the terrible part. She did love Daniel, had never stopped loving him. But somewhere along the way, love had stopped being enough to fill whatever emptiness had opened up inside her. "I don't believe you," Daniel said simply. "That's not fair." "Fair." For the first time, heat entered his voice. Not shouting, but something sharp and raw. "You want to talk about fair? I worked 60-hour weeks to give you the life you wanted. I was faithful. I was present. I built everything around making you happy. And you repaid me by—" He stopped, took a breath, controlled himself. "You know what the worst part is?" he continued, quieter now. "It's not even the cheating. It's that you let me think I was crazy. I'd ask if you were happy and you'd say yes. I'd ask if we were okay, and you'd say we were fine. You let me believe the problem was me while you were building an entire separate life." Hannah couldn't speak, couldn't defend herself because there was no defense. Every word he said was true. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I'll end it right now. I'll block him, change jobs, do whatever you need. Please, we can fix this." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. "No," he said. "We can't. Don't say that. It's already broken, Hannah. Has been for months, maybe longer. We just didn't want to admit it. That's not true. We can go to counseling. We can work on this. People get through this. Some do," Daniel agreed. "But we won't." "How can you know that?" And then he said the thing that would live in her memory forever, the sentence that carved a line between before and after. "Because you gave away what was mine." Hannah's breath caught. "What?" "You gave away what was mine," Daniel repeated, each word deliberate and final. "Not your body. I don't own that, you do. But the things that were supposed to be ours. Intimacy, trust, the private world we built together. You gave pieces of that to someone else, and you can't ungive them." He moved to the chair across from her, finally sitting, but maintaining distance. "When you married me," he continued, "you promised exclusivity, not just physical, but emotional. You promised that the version of yourself you shared with me would be sacred, that our relationship would be the priority, that when things got hard, you'd talk to me, not someone else." Hannah tried to speak, but he held up a hand. "And somewhere along the way, you decided I wasn't enough, that our marriage wasn't enough. So you went looking for validation elsewhere. You shared your thoughts, your laughter, your body, your time with someone who didn't earn it, didn't build anything with you, didn't sacrifice anything for you." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The messages in that folder, I've read them all, multiple times. And you know what kills me? It's not the sex. It's how happy you sound, how alive. How much of yourself you gave him while giving me nothing but obligation and routine." Tears streamed down Hannah's face, unchecked. "I didn't mean to—" "Yes, you did. Every hotel room, every lie. Every time you came home from being with him and kissed me goodnight like nothing happened. You meant it. You chose it." The room felt like it was shrinking. "There's a text in there," Daniel said, "from early September. You told Marcus that being with him made you feel like yourself again. Do you remember that?" Hannah closed her eyes. She remembered. "That broke something in me," Daniel said quietly, "because I realized you were never going to come back. The version of you that I married, that I built a life with, she's gone. and I've been living with someone wearing her face, going through the motions, while the real you exists somewhere else. That's not true. It is true. And I think you know it. Hannah opened her mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come, because underneath all the panic and fear and desperate need to fix this, she recognized the truth in what he was saying. She had given parts of herself to Marcus that Daniel hadn't seen in years, had laughed with him in ways she'd stopped laughing at home, had shared vulnerabilities and desires she'd kept hidden from her husband because sharing them would have required admitting the marriage was failing. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said finally, "but you did. And worse, you were okay with it. For 3 months, you watched me work, watched me try, watched me keep our life running while you met someone else in hotels. You were okay with my pain as long as I didn't know about it." The accusation hung heavy. "Daniel, please. What can I do? What do you need from me?" He stood, moving back to the windows. "I need you to understand something," he said. "This isn't about punishment. It's not about revenge. It's about fundamental incompatibility. We're not incompatible. We are now. Because I can't trust you. And I don't know if I even want to anymore." The statement landed like a physical blow. "You're saying it's over?" Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm saying I can't be married to someone who treats our vows like they're optional, who decides, unilaterally, that the rules don't apply when things get difficult. I made a mistake. Stop calling it a mistake." For the first time, Daniel's voice rose, sharp with frustration. "Leaving the stove on is a mistake. Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. What you did was a sustained campaign of deception that required planning, coordination, and active effort to maintain. That's not a mistake. That's who you chose to be." Hannah flinched. The silence that followed was suffocating. Outside, Los Angeles continued its nightly rhythm, cars on the 110, flights descending into LAX, the pulse of a city that didn't care about one marriage crumbling in a glass house in Pasadena. "I contacted a lawyer," Daniel said eventually. 3 weeks ago. Filed initial paperwork yesterday." The words hit Hannah like ice water. "You already filed for divorce?" "Separation, technically. In California, we need 6 months before it's final, but yes." "Without even talking to me first?" "I tried talking to you for months, Hannah. You chose not to listen. You chose Marcus instead." Her hands gripped the folder so tightly the edges crumpled. "You're really doing this," she said, and it wasn't a question. "I am." "What about counseling? What about trying to rebuild what?" Daniel turned to face her fully. "You can't rebuild on a foundation this broken. You can patch it, sure. Put some plaster over the cracks. But the rot is structural. The first time things get hard again, you'll remember that there are easier options than fighting through it. And I'll remember that my wife chose someone else when it mattered." "I chose wrong," Hannah said desperately. "I know I chose wrong. But I'm choosing you now. I'm choosing us." "Too late," Daniel said. "You don't get to choose us after choosing him. That's not how this works. So that's it. 10 years together. And you're just done." "No, 10 years together, and you were done. I'm just acknowledging it." The distinction shattered something in Hannah, because he was right. She'd checked out of the marriage months before Marcus, had stopped seeing Daniel as a partner, and started seeing him as an obstacle to whatever undefined thing she thought she was missing. The affair was just the symptom. The real disease was that she'd stopped fighting for them long before she'd ended up in someone else's bed. "I don't know who I am without you," she said softly. "Then maybe it's time you figured that out." Daniel walked to the hallway, paused. I'll sleep at my brother's place tonight. Tomorrow we can discuss logistics, who stays in the house, how we split things. But tonight, I just need space. Daniel, please don't leave. We can... There's nothing left to say, Hannah. The folder says it all. He grabbed his keys from the bowl by the door, the small ceramic one they'd bought together at a craft fair in San Diego 5 years ago, back when they still did things together that mattered. The front door opened, closed, and Hannah sat alone in the living room, holding evidence of her own destruction, wondering how she'd become the kind of person who could destroy something she'd claimed to love. Outside, Daniel sat in his Tesla in the driveway for 10 minutes before starting the engine. Not crying, not angry, just empty. He'd prepared for this moment for 3 months. Had planned every word, anticipated every excuse, steeled himself against the tears and pleas that might make him waver. But knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. It just made it survivable. He pulled out of the driveway and headed toward his brother's apartment in Silver Lake, leaving behind the house, the marriage, and the woman who'd taught him that love without respect is just a beautiful lie you tell yourself until you can't anymore. You gave away what was mine. The words echoed in Hannah's mind for days. You gave away what was mine, not possession. Daniel had made that clear. But sacred space, the intimate territory that marriage was supposed to protect, the private jokes, the vulnerable confessions, the parts of yourself you only shared with one person because sharing them meant something. She'd given all of that to Marcus, and in doing so, she'd evacuated the marriage of everything that made it worth saving. 3 days after Daniel left, Hannah tried calling him. It went to voicemail. She texted. No response. She showed up at his brother's apartment in Silver Lake. The brother, Michael, a graphic designer who'd never particularly liked Hannah, answered the door with barely concealed disgust. He doesn't want to see you, Michael said. I just need 5 minutes. You had 10 years. You used those minutes somewhere else. The door closed in her face. Hannah stood in the hallway of the apartment building, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, feeling the full weight of what she'd lost settling onto her shoulders. She'd thought Daniel would be angry, thought there would be screaming, maybe even begging on his part. She'd imagined a dozen different versions of this confrontation, but in none of them had she imagined this, his complete withdrawal, his refusal to engage, his absolute certainty that they were finished. It was terrifying, because anger could be worked with. Anger meant he still cared enough to feel something. But this cold, methodical distance, that meant he'd already grieved the marriage and moved on. That night, lying alone in their bed in Pasadena, Hannah finally let herself break completely. She cried until her ribs ached, cried until she had no tears left, just dry sobs that sounded like drowning. She pulled Daniel's pillow to her chest and could still smell his cologne, that sandalwood scent he'd worn since they met in Chicago. She'd destroyed this. Not the marriage. That was just the structure. She'd destroyed the man who'd loved her completely, who'd worked himself exhausted to give her everything she said she wanted, who'd been faithful and steady and present while she'd repaid him with deception. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. Marcus. You've been quiet. Everything okay? She stared at the message, and for the first time since the affair started, saw it clearly for what it was. Marcus didn't love her. He loved the version of her that existed in hotel rooms, the exciting, uncomplicated version that had no mortgage or history or complicated reality attached. He loved the fantasy, not the woman, and she'd burned down her life for a fantasy. She blocked his number. Then she did what she should have done months ago. She started telling the truth first to herself. She sat in the home office she'd claimed for work, opened her journal, and wrote everything she'd been too cowardly to admit. That she'd been selfish. That she'd used Marcus to avoid dealing with problems in her marriage. That she'd convinced herself she deserved more without ever defining what more actually meant. That Daniel had been right. She'd given away what was his, not her body. That was hers to give. But the trust, the emotional intimacy, the private world they'd built brick by brick over a decade. She'd handed pieces of it to a man who hadn't earned it, who didn't cherish it, who would discard it the moment something shinier came along. And now, she had nothing. No marriage, no lover. Marcus had stopped texting after she explained what happened, disappearing as quickly as he'd appeared. No illusions about who she'd become, just wreckage and the slow, brutal work of accountability. A week after Daniel left, the divorce paperwork arrived via courier. Clean, professional. No vitriol, no accusations beyond the standard, irreconcilable differences. Just legal language outlining the end of everything they'd built. Hannah signed where indicated. Not because she wanted to, but because Daniel deserved to be free from someone who'd treated his love like it was expendable. She hired a lawyer of her own, not to fight Daniel's terms, but to make sure the process was as painless as possible for him. She agreed to sell the house, split the assets 50-50, walk away with no alimony despite California law entitling her to it. Money couldn't fix what she'd broken, and she wouldn't compound the betrayal by making him pay for the privilege of leaving. The only thing she asked for in the settlement was a conversation, one final talk face to face, to say the things she needed to say before they became strangers who once shared a last name. Daniel's lawyer said he'd consider it. 2 weeks later, he agreed. They met at a coffee shop in Eagle Rock, neutral territory far from Pasadena and all its memories. Daniel arrived first, already seated at a corner table when Hannah walked in. He looked different. Not physically. Same dark hair going silver at the temples, same careful posture. But something in his bearing had changed. He looked lighter, somehow. Like putting down the marriage had released weight he'd been carrying longer than either of them realized. "Thank you for meeting me," Hannah said, sitting across from him. Daniel nodded, but didn't smile. "I don't want to drag this out," he said. "You said you needed to say something, so say it." Hannah had rehearsed this 100 times, but now, facing him, all the careful speeches evaporated. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know that's not enough, but I need you to hear it. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for lying. I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is, I wasn't enough. For us. For you. For myself." Daniel listened without interrupting. "I told myself a lot of lies," she continued, "that you'd stopped paying attention to me, that our marriage was dying anyway, that I deserved to feel wanted. But the truth is, I was just a coward. I didn't have the courage to tell you I was unhappy or to work on fixing it. I took the easy way out, and I destroyed everything in the process." She paused, gathering herself. "You were right, about all of it. I gave away what was yours. I treated our vows like they were negotiable. I became someone I don't recognize and someone I'm ashamed of." Tears threatened, but she forced them back. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just needed you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm sorry. For all of it." Silence settled between them. Daniel took a sip of his coffee, considering. "I appreciate you saying that," he said finally. "And I believe you mean it, but it doesn't change anything." "I know. Good." because I need you to understand something too." He set his cup down, met her eyes directly. "I don't hate you, Hannah. I probably should, but I don't. What I feel is tired and sad and grateful it's over." The last word hit harder than hatred would have. "I spent 3 months carrying what you did," he continued. "Watching you lie to my face. Watching you light up for someone else while treating me like furniture. And in that time, I learned something important. I deserve better." "You do," Hannah agreed quietly. "I deserve someone who chooses me, not as a backup or a safety net, but as a first choice. Someone who communicates when things get hard instead of running to someone else. Someone who understands that marriage is work, and that work is worth it." He leaned back. "That wasn't you. Maybe it was once, back in Chicago. But it hasn't been for a long time. And I can't keep trying to resurrect someone who doesn't want to exist anymore." Hannah nodded, throat tight. "What you did taught me something else too," Daniel said. "That I'd been settling, not just with you, but with myself. I'd let our marriage become my entire identity. Let my happiness depend entirely on whether you were happy. That's not healthy, it's not sustainable, and it's not a foundation for anything real." He stood, preparing to leave. "So, thank you in a way, for forcing me to face that, for making the decision I probably needed to make anyway but was too scared to. Daniel, I hope you figure out what you're looking for," he said. "I hope you find someone who makes you happy. But more than that, I hope you learn to be honest, with yourself and with whoever comes next, because nobody deserves what you put me through." He walked away. No hug, no final goodbye. Just the quiet closing of a chapter that should have ended differently, but couldn't. Hannah sat alone in the coffee shop, watching through the window as Daniel got into his car and drove away. And for the first time, she understood the full weight of what she'd lost. Not just a husband, but a witness to her life. A partner in building something meaningful. A man who'd loved her when she was easy to love, and stayed even when she wasn't. She'd gambled all of it on 3 months of attention from a man who'd never know her the way Daniel had. And now she had to live with that choice. Forever. The house sold in 3 weeks. In Los Angeles' competitive market, a modern 3-bedroom in Pasadena with mountain views went fast. They accepted an offer from a young tech couple relocating from San Francisco, people starting their life together while Daniel and Hannah ended theirs. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Dividing 10 years of shared life proved more difficult than the legal paperwork. They met on a Saturday morning to sort belongings. Daniel arrived with his brother Michael for support and heavy lifting. Hannah came alone because the friends she'd have called were mutual friends, and she'd lost the right to ask them to choose sides. "Take whatever you want," Hannah said when Daniel walked in. "I don't need most of it." It was true. Looking at the furniture they'd picked out together, the art they'd bought on vacation, the kitchen appliances that had served meals for a decade, none of it mattered anymore. They were just objects that happened to exist in proximity to love that no longer did. Daniel moved through the house methodically. He took the desk from the office, the one he'd worked at during late nights while Hannah slept. Took the coffee maker they'd gotten as a wedding gift. Took half the books from the shelves they'd built together one weekend in their 2nd year of marriage when they still believed assembling IKEA furniture was bonding. He left the bed. Couldn't bring himself to take the place where the final betrayal had crystallized. Where he'd lain awake so many nights wondering if he was crazy for suspecting what turned out to be true. "You should take the art from our trip to Seattle," Daniel said, pointing to a framed photograph of the Space Needle at sunset. You always loved that one. You paid for the trip, Hannah replied. You should have it. I don't want it. They stared at each other for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down. Fine, Hannah said. I'll take it. They worked in near silence for 3 hours, creating 2 separate lives from one shared existence. By noon, the house looked ransacked. Half-empty shelves, bare walls where photos used to hang, spaces where furniture had created the geometry of their daily routines. When they finished, Michael loaded Daniel's belongings into a U-Haul while Hannah stood in the living room looking at what remained. Daniel found her there. That's everything, he said. Lawyer said the final papers should be ready in a month. Hannah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Take care of yourself, Daniel added. Not warm, but not cruel either. Just a statement of basic human decency towards someone he used to love. You too. He turned to leave, then paused. Hannah? Yeah? I mean it. Figure out what you're looking for. Don't do this to someone else. Then he was gone. The door closed. The house that had held 10 years of marriage stood empty except for Hannah and the ghosts of every choice that had led to this moment. She sank to the floor and cried. Not the desperate, gasping sobs from before, just quiet tears for the life she'd destroyed and the person she'd have to rebuild from the wreckage. Daniel moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Culver City, smaller than the Pasadena house, less impressive, but his, untainted by memories of betrayal, uncompromised by the weight of what used to be. He spent the first week setting up with a monk's efficiency. Minimalist furniture from CB2, art prints that meant nothing except he liked the colors, a bed he'd never shared with anyone, in a space that held no history. Starting over at 42 felt strange. Not bad, just disorienting. Like waking up from a decade-long dream into a reality that required recalibration. His brother visited on his 3rd day in the new place, bringing whiskey and Thai food from Night Plus Market. How you doing? Michael asked, handing Daniel a glass. Honestly, I don't know yet. They sat on Daniel's new couch, grey, modern, nothing like the overstuffed sectional Hannah had insisted on buying 5 years ago. You did the right thing, Michael said. Did I? You know you did. She cheated, she lied, she made you feel crazy while she was the one acting crazy. You had every right to walk away. Daniel swirled his whiskey. I know. Logically, I know. But emotionally, it still feels like failure. It's not failure. It's survival. Maybe. They drank in silence for a moment. You want my advice? Michael asked. Do I have a choice? Michael smiled. Take some time. Don't jump into dating. Don't try to fix what you broke by finding someone new. Just exist for a while. Figure out who Daniel is when he's not trying to make someone else happy. It was good advice. Daniel took it. He threw himself into work initially, took on extra projects, volunteered for the challenging assignments other developers avoided. Work had always been his safe space, the place where problems had clear solutions and effort produced measurable results. But after a month, he realized he was doing the same thing he'd done in the marriage, using work to avoid dealing with himself. So he tried something different. He started running, not seriously at first, just around the neighborhood in Culver City, early mornings before work. But there was something meditative about it, the rhythm, the solitude, the physical exhaustion that made thinking impossible. He ran farther, downloaded Couch to 5K, and worked through the program methodically. Signed up for a 10K in Santa Monica and trained like it mattered. On race day, crossing the finish line in the shadow of the Santa Monica Pier, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in months. Pride. not in someone else's accomplishment or in maintaining appearances, just simple pride in doing something difficult because he chose to. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was a start. He made new routines. Friday nights at the art galleries in Culver City's art district. Saturday mornings at the Grand Central Market downtown, trying foods from vendors he'd never noticed when he was married. Sunday hikes in Runyon Canyon, pushing himself up steep inclines while Los Angeles sprawled below. He avoided dating apps, avoided the bar scene, avoided anything that felt like trying to replace Hannah with a shinier version of the same thing. Instead, he relearned how to be alone without being lonely. It took months. Some days were better than others. Some nights he still woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there, muscle memory outlasting memory itself. Some moments he'd see couples holding hands in coffee shops and feel the absence of what he'd lost like a phantom limb. But slowly, incrementally, he started feeling like himself again. Or rather, like a new version of himself. Someone shaped by betrayal, but not defined by it. Someone who understood that love required more than good intentions. It required matching actions, honest communication, and the courage to choose each other even when choosing was hard. 6 months after leaving Pasadena, Daniel received the final divorce decree in the mail. He opened it in his apartment, read the legal language that officially ended their marriage, and felt nothing. Not relief, not grief, just acknowledgement. It was over, legally, emotionally, spiritually. He filed the papers in a drawer, poured himself a whiskey, and stood on his balcony watching the sun set over Los Angeles. Somewhere in this city, Hannah was living her own version of after. He hoped she'd learned something, hoped she'd become someone better, more honest, more willing to face hard truths. But ultimately, it wasn't his concern anymore. His concern was building a life that felt authentic, finding work that challenged him, friendships that sustained him, and eventually, when he was ready, love that respected him. He didn't know what that looked like yet, but for the first time since discovering the affair, he felt capable of finding out. 14 months after the divorce, Daniel accepted a job offer in Austin. It wasn't running away. He'd stayed in LA long enough to prove that. But the city held too many ghosts, too many streets that led to memories he'd rather not revisit. Texas offered something California couldn't: a complete reset. He moved in August, driving across the Southwest with his belongings packed into his Tesla and a playlist of music he'd discovered post-divorce. Artists he'd never had time for when he was married. Songs that spoke to becoming rather than being. Austin felt different. Smaller than LA, but vibrant in its own way. Tech scene mixed with live music. Breakfast tacos instead of juice bars. Humidity that made the California boy in him sweat, but also reminded him he was somewhere new. He rented a loft in East Austin, exposed brick and high ceilings, the kind of space he'd never have chosen with Hannah, because it wasn't practical for a family they'd never ended up having. The new job was demanding. Senior architect role at a growing startup, building infrastructure for applications that would scale to millions of users. The problems were complex enough to be engaging, the team smart enough to be stimulating. Work filled his days productively, but it was the evenings that taught him who he was becoming. He joined a running club that met at Lady Bird Lake, made friends with other transplants, people from Seattle, San Francisco, New York, all of them carrying their own stories of why they'd chosen Austin as the place to rebuild. He learned to cook beyond the bachelor basics he'd mastered in Culver City, took a class at Central Market, and discovered he enjoyed the meditative precision of following recipes, the small satisfactions of making something with his own hands. He started therapy. Not because he was broken, but because he wanted to understand the patterns that had led him to stay silent for so long, to ignore red flags until they were undeniable, to build his identity entirely around being someone's husband instead of being himself. Dr. Patterson, his therapist, was a woman in her 60s who didn't traffic in platitudes. "You enabled her," she said bluntly in their 4th session. "I what?" "You enabled Hannah's behavior by not setting boundaries. By being so focused on being the good husband that you forgot to be a person with needs and standards." Daniel bristled. "I didn't enable her cheating. No. But you enabled the conditions that made cheating possible. You accepted being deprioritized. You swallowed your concerns instead of voicing them. You performed emotional labor while accepting none in return. That's not love. That's martyrdom." The words stung because they were true. "Marriage is supposed to be partnership," Dr. Patterson continued. "Equal investment, equal vulnerability, equal risk. But you were doing all the work while she was doing all the taking. And when she found someone who made her feel good without requiring anything from her, of course she went there. You'd trained her to expect sacrifice without reciprocity. So it's my fault?" "No. Her choices are her responsibility, but your patterns are yours to examine. If you don't, you'll repeat them with someone else." Daniel spent the next months examining those patterns. How he'd learned from his parents' difficult marriage that love meant endurance, staying no matter what, fixing problems through sheer determination, never admitting defeat. How he'd confused peacekeeping with partnership, conflict avoidance with compatibility. How he'd measured his worth by Hannah's happiness instead of his own integrity. Unpacking it was painful. But pain was data, and data led to change. By his 2nd year in Austin, Daniel felt fundamentally different from the man who'd driven away from Pasadena. He dated occasionally, nothing serious. A few dinners with women he met through work or mutual friends. Some 2nd and 3rd dates that didn't lead anywhere. He learned what he didn't want. Someone who expected him to fix them, someone who confused intensity with intimacy, someone who couldn't communicate needs without games. He also learned what he did want, someone who showed up consistently, who had their own life but chose to include him in it, who could handle conflict without cruelty or avoidance. Someone who understood that love was a verb, not a feeling. He wasn't in a hurry. The urgency that had defined his 20s and 30s had been replaced by something more sustainable: patience. On a Saturday in October, 2 years after the divorce, Daniel drove out to Hamilton Pool, a natural swimming hole west of Austin. The fall colors were just starting, and the limestone formations glowed in afternoon light. He swam alone, the water cold and clear, thinking about nothing in particular, and realized, treading water in that ancient pool, that he was happy. Not happy in spite of the divorce, just happy. Present. Grateful for the life he'd built from wreckage. Hannah had given him an unwanted gift. The chance to become someone more complete than the man she'd married. He'd taken that chance seriously. And standing there in Texas water under Texas sun, far from Los Angeles and farther still from the man who'd discovered his wife's betrayal in a manila folder, Daniel Moon felt something close to peace. 3 years after the divorce, Daniel received a LinkedIn message. Hannah Moon. "Hi, Daniel. I know this might be unwelcome, but I wanted to reach out. I'm in Austin for a conference next month and wondered if you'd be open to coffee. No expectations. I'd like to see you, if you're willing." He stared at the message for a long time. His first instinct was to delete it. The past was past, and he'd worked hard to build a life separate from the woman who'd broken his trust. Seeing her again served no purpose except potentially reopening wounds that had finally scarred over. But another part of him, the part that believed in facing things directly rather than avoiding them, was curious. Not about reconciliation. That door had closed permanently, but about who she'd become in the years since they'd last spoken in that Eagle Rock coffee shop. He waited 3 days before responding. Daniel Moon. I'm willing to meet. There's a place called Houndstooth Coffee on North Lamar. Next Tuesday at 2 p.m. work? Hannah Moon. That works. Thank you. Tuesday arrived with the crisp clarity that October brings to Texas. Daniel got to Houndstooth early, ordered his usual cold brew, and sat at an outdoor table watching people pass on North Lamar. He wasn't nervous exactly, just alert, prepared for whatever version of Hannah walked through that door. She arrived 5 minutes late, and for a moment he didn't recognize her. Her hair was shorter, cut into a practical bob instead of the long blonde waves she'd maintained throughout their marriage. She looked thinner, more angular, dressed in professional casual that suggested she'd come straight from whatever conference had brought her to Austin. But it was her expression that struck him most. The practiced brightness was gone. The performance of happiness that had characterized so much of their final years together had been replaced by something more subdued. Not sad exactly, but sober, like someone who'd learned expensive lessons and hadn't forgotten them. Daniel, she said, sitting across from him. Hannah. She ordered tea from the barista, and they sat in silence until it arrived. You look good, she said finally. Different, but good. Thanks. So do you. More silence. I appreciate you meeting me, Hannah said. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. What changed your mind? Daniel considered the question. Curiosity, I guess, and the fact that I don't hate you anymore. Holding on to that felt like carrying furniture I didn't need. Hannah nodded slowly. I don't hate you either, she said. For the record. I know I have no right to hate you for anything, but I wanted you to know I don't. Okay. She sipped her tea, gathering herself. I've been in therapy, she said, for 2 years now, dealing with everything that led to what I did, to us ending. Daniel didn't respond, just listened. I learned a lot about myself, she continued. None of it particularly flattering. Turns out I have patterns. Avoidance, people-pleasing, using external validation to avoid dealing with internal problems. She smiled thinly. My therapist says I was using Marcus the way some people use alcohol, as an escape from reality instead of dealing with reality. That's probably accurate, Daniel said. It is. And I'm sorry. I know I said that before, but I understand it differently now. I wasn't just sorry you found out. I'm sorry for who I became. For treating you like you were disposable, for convincing myself that my unhappiness justified hurting you. Daniel absorbed this. What happened with Marcus? He asked. Nothing. He disappeared the week after you left. Blocked my number. Unfollowed me on social media, just gone. Turns out he was only interested in the affair, not the person having it. Did that surprise you? It should have, Hannah said. But honestly, no. I think part of me always knew he wasn't real. That what we had wasn't real. But real required work, and fantasy was easier. She set down her tea. I stayed in LA for about a year after the divorce, sold the house, moved to a smaller place in Silver Lake, tried to figure out who I was without you, without anyone. How'd that go? Badly at first. I dated too quickly, made more mistakes, kept running from myself. But eventually I got tired of running. Started therapy, started being honest about why I'd destroyed the best thing in my life. Daniel listened without judgment. I'm in Portland now, she continued. Been there about 18 months. Different agency, different life. I'm better. Not healed, but better. Working on being someone who doesn't blow up her life when things get difficult. That's good, Daniel said, and meant it. They sat in the Austin afternoon, two people who'd once shared everything and now shared only history. Can I ask you something? Hannah said. Sure. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd just talked to you? If instead of cheating I'd come to you and said, I'm unhappy, I need us to fix this? Daniel considered the question carefully. Sometimes, but I don't think it would have worked. Why not? Because by the time you were unhappy enough to act, the damage was already done. We'd been drifting for years. I was burying myself in work. You were burying yourself in whatever you were burying yourself in. We'd stopped being partners and become roommates who occasionally had sex. He paused. If you'd talked to me, we might have gone to counseling, might have tried to fix it. But I don't think we would have succeeded, because the foundation wasn't solid enough to build on. We'd gotten married young, for the right reasons at the time, but we'd grown into different people who wanted different things. That's probably true, Hannah said. Doesn't excuse what you did, Daniel added. You should have ended it before starting something else. But understanding the context helps me make peace with it. Hannah nodded. Are you seeing anyone? She asked. Casually. Nothing serious yet. I'm not in a hurry. That's wise. More silence. I should probably go, Hannah said eventually. I have a dinner thing with the conference people. Okay. They stood. For a moment it looked like Hannah might try to hug him, but she seemed to think better of it. Thank you for meeting me, she said. It means more than you know. You're welcome. She turned to leave, then paused. Daniel? Yeah? I really am sorry. For all of it. You deserved better than what I gave you. I know, Daniel said, but I'm okay now. Better than okay, actually. So, thank you. In a weird way. Hannah smiled. Genuine this time. Take care of yourself. You too. She walked away, disappearing into the Austin afternoon, and Daniel sat back down at the outdoor table. He didn't feel closure. Closure was a myth people told themselves to make endings feel neat. Real endings were messier, loose threads, unanswered questions, scars that never quite faded. But he felt something close to acceptance. Acceptance that the marriage had happened and ended for reasons that made sense, even if they hurt. Acceptance that Hannah was a flawed human who'd made terrible choices but wasn't irredeemable. Acceptance that he'd grown from the experience in ways he couldn't have without it. He finished his coffee, pulled out his phone, and texted his running group about the evening route. Then he drove home to his loft in East Austin, to the life he'd built deliberately and carefully from the ruins of what came before. Somewhere in Portland, Hannah was doing the same, building something new from old mistakes, learning to be someone who could sustain love instead of sabotaging it. They'd probably never speak again. That was okay. Some relationships serve their purpose by existing. Others serve their purpose by ending. Daniel had learned to tell the difference. And that, more than any conversation or apology or explanation, was the real healing. Not forgetting, not forgiving in the way that erased consequences, just moving forward with wisdom earned through pain, carrying scars that proved he'd survived something that could have destroyed him. In the end, that was enough. End